Hi, MR. It's an absolute
Hello.
pleasure to have you on our show today. How are you doing?
Great, Supriya. Thank you for having me. It's been a rainy day here in San Francisco, but now the sun has come out, so it's a great time to do a podcast.
Absolutely. And congratulations on Niners making it to the Super Bowl. I'm pretty sure you're quite excited about the game.
Absolutely, I'm a diehard Niner fan. Been at all the games and waiting to go to the Super Bowl and cheer on the Niners. Yeah,
All right, we should just, go ahead and get started on that note.
absolutely.
What an incredible journey, MR. How has been your American dream like?
Well, I mean, I think the concept of the American dream can be defined many different ways. I think in my case, it was more an opportunity to come to the United States and make something of myself. And when I came, it was a blank slate. I really didn't know what I was going to do. I came here for my MBA and I was still hesitant. Should I be in marketing? Should I be in operations? I really didn't know where to focus. When I got out, I got a job in manufacturing. And after 3 years of that, there was a lucky break. I was going for some training, and the consultant who was doing the training said, "Hey, tell me about yourself." And I said, this is my background. I have an MBA. I use computers at work. He says, "What the heck are you doing in Houston? You should be in Silicon Valley." And this was 1982. There was no internet, nothing. How do you find out what the heck Silicon Valley is about, right? And so that's what got me kind of curious about Silicon Valley. I did some research. I sent a few regular mails, with postage stamps and stuff to companies I thought would hire me. And luck would have it again, somebody was crazy enough to interview me on the phone in those days. No Zoom, no FaceTime, none of that. Interview me, fly me out to Silicon Valley, and give me a job on the spot.
Wow, pretty
So it was a
interesting.
huge lucky break. But I was also very naive. I didn't know that I was joining a startup, right? So I joined this company. It's 20 some people, doubles every year. And in 3 years, it goes broke. It goes chapter 11. I'm like, what the heck is this all about, right? So I was so naive. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't know what was going on. Just took a job because I was single and I was trying to take a risk. But so my American dream was all over the place in that I didn't have a plan. I didn't execute to a plan. I just took a road, and that road took me from Houston to Silicon Valley and beyond.
Very interesting. So, Emma, at what point really you thought that you would become an angel investor, or that also just happened by chance?
Yeah, my life journey, unfortunately, I don't have any practical tips to give people, is a long and winding road. It goes to many interesting places, some not so interesting, but it's a long and winding road. So I was in the tech sector for quite a bit, being a chief marketing officer at different companies and stuff. And I was lucky that after a couple of these failures, which happens often in Silicon Valley, by the way, I warn people, don't think your first startup is going to be a success. It could be your second, your third, your fifth, your 10th. You can't determine success. You have to only be lucky. You have to work hard and hope for luck. That's all you can do. So my third startup was a success in the sense that the company was able to go public. And so when that happened, my stock options were worth a lot of money. So I could have stayed on with that company for many, many years and made many, many more millions. Instead, I wanted to lead a different life. I wanted to have a family. I didn't want to travel 300,000 miles a year. So I gave that up and just quit, not knowing what I was going to do. Again, like I said, the journey just goes on. At that time, this was 1995. There were small companies starting up in Silicon Valley, and they didn't have capital because most of the capital in Silicon Valley came from venture capitalists. And these are people who give $2 to $5 million of capital to companies that have shown some progress. So I became what was called an angel investor that would work with two founders and a PowerPoint deck and try to help them raise a little bit of money so they could hire a couple of people, get a couple of customers, and actually bring it to a stage where venture capitalists would fund it. Okay. So I got into it again by accident. I call myself an accidental tourist in Silicon Valley that hasn't left in 40 years.
Wow, pretty interesting journey. So, you've been an angel investor now for like maybe 30 years almost, right? So, what are some of your vetting criterias before you make a final decision on any company?
Yeah, I think a lot of investors look at a deal and look for disruption. They look for a large market. They look for a lot of things. I tend to focus really on the founders. Are the founders capable of navigating a turbulent environment? Are they good listeners? Do they actually make their commitments? And so I take my time investing in a deal. It's not something I look at a deal and I say yes or no. I take time in getting to know the founders. Again, trying to assess whether they're capable of leading, capable of pivoting, capable of enduring tough times, and those qualities are most important to me rather than the size of the market and how big the opportunity is. Because most companies within 6 months to 12 months pivot to something different. Where they started was this market, where they end up in 2 years is this market. Okay. So I look for the capability of the founders, the chemistry I have with the founders. Can I be honest and candid? Will they take feedback? Do they get defensive? So those are the criteria I use, and I take my time. It could take 2, 3 months before I invest. And if they're in a hurry, I tell them to go and I look for the next one.
Perfect. So, we're living in an era of startups and entrepreneurship. Pretty much everybody wants to have their own startup and business. So, what advice would you give to the young entrepreneurs and young CEOs of startup companies?
I would say, first of all, be prepared for the risk. A lot of people now try to have a job, they have a job, then they try to do a startup on the side. And they come to me and say sometimes, when I get the money, I will quit my job. And I like to see commitment up front where they say they have quit their job and they've started a company. So I would say, from a founder point of view, assess the risk. Are you prepared to quit your job and start a company? That's number one. Second, are you prepared for a 10-year commitment? Because most people think Facebook or Salesforce was an overnight success. If you really look at the history of those companies, it took at least 10 years to get value, to really create value for everybody. So
Right.
don't think going in 2 years, you're going to sell your company. In 3 years, it's going to go public. That doesn't happen. Maybe 1 in a million times it does happen, right? So go into it for the long haul, go into it prepared for the risk, go into it prepared for failure, but hoping for success, right? So go into it optimistic, but being a realist at the same time somehow, to go, it may not work eventually, and knowing when to stop. That's the other thing that happens to a lot of founders. I know some founders who've been at it 20 years and they still don't realize they have to stop because they haven't made any money for themselves. They haven't made money for the investors. They haven't really helped the customers as much as they should. They're still going on because that's the only thing they want to do. So you need to know when to stop as well. So all these are qualities and things that and things you need to think through when you start a company.
Perfect. So, Emma, with current inflation and the increased, interest rates, do you think it has an impact on valuation of any companies?
Yeah, I think that goes in cycles, Supriya. I mean, 2 years ago, companies were valued outrageously. You became a unicorn in 6 months without a business model. Today's world is much more tempered. I think people look for a product market fit. People look for some kind of traction in a product, and they value it accordingly. So companies that were getting valued at 100 times sales are now getting valued at 10 times sales. So founders have to be realistic in their expectations of what valuations they're going to get. Also, they're going to get far less money with each round of funding. In the old days, it would be hey, let's do a Series A and we'll get 50 million in funding. Now your Series A funding might be 5 million. So I think these are all the things you need to be prepared in today's environment. And again, in today's environment, you need to be prepared to stay for that 10-year mark that I mentioned. It's going to take a while to actually build value for your company.
Perfect. So, Emma, you are a proud founder of Indiaspora, and I know this is something which is very close to your heart. Tell us how it started, what motivated you to start Indiaspora, what are some of the growth and expansion plans you have?
Yeah, I told you I've been an angel investor for almost 30 years. I've done 150 deals. More than half of them have gone broke. I mean, that's pretty standard for angel investing, but that really for me is like a hobby as opposed to a true passion. My true passion is to build networks. And so I ended up starting 25 years ago, building a network of CEOs of software companies. And that was started by me as a philanthropic effort. So everybody would pay money to attend, and we'd give all the profits away to nonprofits. So I've always had, because I did that the first time, I've really loved doing nonprofit work because it's much more gratifying than becoming a unicorn for me, because that really is a very different kind of impact that you can make. So
Mhm.
after having done this group of network of CEOs called Enterprise, then I did a second network, which is called Corporate Eco Forum, which is a network to work on sustainability. This is a group of 85 of the world's largest companies: Apple, Amazon, Disney, UPS, you name it. They're all members of this group to work on climate change. And then about 12 years ago, I kind of wanted to do something for my own community, i.e., the Indian diaspora. And that's when I looked around again as an entrepreneur, even though it's a nonprofit, I kind of bring that same entrepreneurial focus. Should we even have an organization like this? Who's going to, sign up for it? How are you going to make money? What is the end goal? I thought through all that by talking to over 100 Indian community leaders, whether they were doctors, lawyers, academics, business people, CEOs, really understanding what was there, what was needed, could we even actually have a viable solution for it? And so that was the basis to start in diaspora. And really what I heard from our community was it needed to be an inclusive community. It needed to be secular. It
Yeah.
needed to be including every profession. It needed to include young people. It needed to have 50% women, although we're not quite there, we're about 33% women. It needed to have all these elements to be successful. We also heard this shouldn't be focused on business. It shouldn't be focused on money. It needs to be focused on philanthropy, collaboration, sharing, giving, mentoring, bringing that ethos from India, which is all called seva or service. This needs to have that orientation as opposed to making money. So that is at the heart of Indiaspora, is to be a force for good. So we want this organization to do things that bring good to community, to society, to the world at large. So we have focused on philanthropy. For example, during COVID, the Indiaspora community rose up, and in 1 month, Supriya, in 1 month, we raised $15 million for COVID relief in India and $1 million for relief in the US as well. Okay. So
Incredible.
this is the money that the community has that can be put to good use. And so philanthropy is at the heart of what we do. We continue this effort. Now we have something called the India Giving Day, which is coming up on March 1st. We started this a year ago to say, can Indians and Indians in the diaspora just give using their credit card 1 day a year, much like all of America does that on Giving Tuesday, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
after we've eaten turkey and after we've spent all our money on Black Friday and all that. On Tuesday, we feel guilty and we give money back to causes. So I said, this is India Giving Day that happens on March 1st. And we did this a year ago. We raised 1.4 million through credit cards in 1 day to causes. This year, it's coming up on March 1st. We hope it's a much bigger number. So again, philanthropy is at the heart of Indiaspora. We also engage with the community in many different ways, in the arts, in many, many other ways, in tackling climate change, getting involved in getting people to do public service,
Mhm.
i.e., whether they want to be in politics or in government or in policy. So these are all the different aspects of Indiaspora. We have a great website, indiaspora.org. We have one of the best newsletters in the business, which goes to tens of thousands of people. So I encourage your listeners and viewers to take a look and see if it's something they want to be engaged with.
Absolutely. I'm sure they will be intrigued with this whole idea of in diaspora. So, talking about politics, we see that a lot of Indian Americans are getting involved more and more in the American politics. So, how do you see this from your perspective? Do you see that we have a good, stronger voice in the political system now as an Indian American community?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was Indiaspora played a role in this 12 years ago. Because when we first started, we looked around and said, everybody said, we have 1% of the population. We're the highest earning demographic. We have so many CEOs in the Fortune 500. Then someone turned around and said, are we influential? Do we have anybody in Congress representing us? And the answer was we had zero, right?
Yeah,
So what the Diaspora Network did starting 2012 is to fund anyone with an Indian name. Krishnamurti, Jayapal, Khanna, Kamala. We funded all of these people to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in 2017, we had a big gala in DC where the then Speaker Nancy Pelosi and others came to recognize that Indian Americans are now 1% of Congress. So we are 1% of the population, we're 1% of Congress. What that set off was this interest in the community to do more. And you fast forward in 2020, over 300 people ran for office, Indian Americans, city council, school board, mayor, you name it, every kind of race we had Indian. And now I'm sure in 2024, it's going to be even larger. Okay.
right.
So we're a catalyst and a platform to start this movement. And now it's taken a life of its own. So I'm really excited to see both Republicans and Democrats. I mean, you see now Nikki Haley is on the Republican side
Yeah.
in the primaries contesting. You see on the Democratic side, Kamala Harris as vice president. I mean, so it's fantastic to see how quickly our community has come to prominence in politics. And this summer, we're going to have a big event in DC, not just to discuss politics on a nonpartisan basis, but also to look at public service. The Biden administration has over 150 Indian Americans in various jobs, including the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, and so many others, right? And when you look at policy, you look at think tanks. In the think tanks in the country, Indian Americans are everywhere in these think tanks and NGOs. So again, serving policy, politics, and public service, we are so happy to see so many Indians give back rather than just trying to make money.
Wow, that is very interesting information, Naimar. And thank you so much for your contribution and all the support to the Indian American community. On that note, are you ready for a quick rapid fire?
Sure. I want to stress one more thing. The other thing with the Indian diaspora that Indian Americans should know about is that the global diaspora is 30 million of us. Okay. People like you and I, the 30 million that live in many, many, many different countries, right? The
Yeah.
top countries are US, Canada, UK, Singapore, UAE, and Australia. These tend to have about 10 to 12 million of the 30 million. These tend to be the more successful diaspora. But let's not forget, there are a lot of diaspora who are not so successful as us. People who live in Fiji, Guyana, Trinidad, Suriname, Mauritius. So it's the onus is on the rich diaspora to try and find ways to help the not so privileged diaspora as well. But that's kind of the backdrop that we live in. The other thing is we don't want to be just known as rich people or people who are successful. We need to be known as givers and not takers. And
Yeah.
in that, let's not also forget that the Indian American community, there are over 6% of the community, something like over a 250,000 people who live below the poverty line in the United States. These are what we call the invisible Indians. They might work at a convenience store, they might be an Uber driver. These people don't make even the average wage to be above the poverty line. Also, the second challenge we have is next to the Mexican community, we have the highest undocumented people in the United States. There are
Right.
750,000, this is the estimate, of Indians who have come to the US, either extended their student visa or the tourist visa, or come across the border, and they're living in the US without papers. So we need to also be aware that we need to help these people who are here, who are not as privileged as you and I, who are privileged enough to either have a green card or be a citizen or legally be in this country. There's this whole host of people with us.
Oh, that's really kind of you to even think about all of these things, MR. Really appreciate all the insightful information on Indian diaspora, so-called Indiaspora. And on that note, let's start your quick rapid fire with us.
Sounds good.
Perfect. One thing you always do before a big event or a meeting.
Big event or a meeting, I try to think of what impact the meeting can make. I think of some jokes I can make. I don't know. And one thing I don't do is I don't like to eat much before I give a keynote or a talk. I want to be a little nervous, a little hungry. That brings out a lot more energy in me than to kind of speak on a full stomach where I feel tired or sleepy.
Lazy. One thing you wish you did differently at the start of your career.
Boy, this is a good one. I guess I can say I wish I'd come to Silicon Valley before I went to Houston. But on the other hand, I found my wife in Houston, so I don't want to take that back.
Right. One thing you see today's generation doing well as compared to the previous.
I think today's generation is much more forward thinking, much more progressive. They think of things like climate change, of inclusion, of minorities. They think of so many things that when I got started, I was only thinking of getting a paycheck and repaying my student loans, as opposed to the kids now, they're thinking much more progressively than we did.
Right. What's your source of inspiration?
My source of inspiration, I think, are my kids because they are so far ahead of me when I was their age that I'm just in awe of how much they know, how much they want to do, and how geared up they are for their role in society and their life journey.
Oh, that's nice. What's the first thing you do while starting your workday?
First thing I do is a bad habit. I look at my phone and check my messages. I think what I would like to do is to probably meditate, but the phone gets in the way.
I know we all have that addiction, right? What's a lesser known fact about you, MR?
Everybody, if you're Indian, thinks cricket is your biggest sport that you follow. And you might think after we talk that it's football, but what people don't know about me is I follow a very obscure sport, which is the number one sport in Australia, which is called Aussie rules football. It's a combination of American football and rugby. It's somewhere in between the two.
Yeah.
Only Australians know it. Nobody else knows it, but I'm the biggest fan of that.
Wow. Interesting. What's a must thing on your work desk?
Must thing on my workday is a walk. I'm kind of obsessed with the 10,000 steps count, and I'm fortunate and privileged enough to be living close to the Golden Gate Bridge here in San Francisco. So anything, if it's a nice day, I just go walk to the bridge.
Thank you so much, MR, for joining Gold Media. It was wonderful talking to you, and we wish Niners good luck for the Super Bowl.
Thank you so much, Supriya, and thank you for having me on the show.